Hey everybody, I'm Mike,
And I'm Austin.
and today we're going to talk about the pre-deployment stage and go into detail. So just to kind of start this section off, this stage begins when the unit finds out they're being ready to deploy. Sometimes that can just be a few weeks, and sometimes that can be a year. It depends. I've seen both, and it also kind of depends on the unit. There are some units that are global response forces, and they have to be ready to deploy at much more rapid paces than other units, while some units get up to a year or even a year and a half to figure out their going and begin training cycles for that.
So with the pre-deployment stage kind of begins with that little bit of denial and anticipation of losing that soldier from their life for the duration of the deployment. And as the departure date gets closer, spouses often find themselves asking if the soldier really has to go. And eventually the increased field training and preparation, as well as those long hours away from home, begin to really drive the point home that that soldier is going to be leaving, and it's not entirely their choice. However, the soldiers are typically more energetic about it, especially about the upcoming mission and their unit and the bonding, as well as preparing for a hopefully successful deployment. However, it increases a sense of emotional and physical distance for the military spouses. As we mentioned in our first podcast with those uncertain dates, sometimes the spouses get stressed or frustrated with saying goodbye so many times, and they almost find themselves pushing the soldier out the door, as if their loved ones are already, like the way this article puts, psychologically deployed.
All right. So once the reality kind of sets in for the family, and the soldier gets this, hey, I'm actually going, and this is actually going to happen. The next stage is to get their affairs in order. Now, our previous podcast had gone fairly in-depth into this issue, but just to kind of recap a few things, this is when you get, as this article states, honey-do lists, and you start dealing with all sorts of manners, like home repairs, security, adding those extra locks, just giving the deployed soldier and the family a little more peace of mind as far as being secure. Last-minute car maintenance to make sure that they're leaving with a car that will function while they're gone. Finances, which we talked about earlier, even tax preparation, which is different. You have to look into what income is taxable and what is not, because deployed pay is not taxed, as long as it's to a combat zone. Child care plans and wills, and a lot of these things we had touched on before, but they're just things you should go into more detail about. Also during this time, people make plans for having maybe the best Christmas ever, the best get-together ever before they leave, or maybe even plans for when they get back. But it's almost a little distant in the planning, because people are nervous during this period, and they want to be close, but they're almost afraid of being close. And then during this time, there's also other thoughts about how will the children handle this, how are you going to cope, and how are you going to make this relationship work, and even will the marriage survive? So these are all problems that can arise during this period.
Yeah, additionally with that stress to try and make things perfect before the soldier leaves, a pretty common occurrence is that soldiers and their significant other are going to have some type of outstanding or significant argument. Typically for couples that have been together for a long while, they found that the argument they can accurately attribute it to the ebb and flow and the stressors that come with the deployment, and they can get through it pretty easily. But for those younger couples, especially experiencing deployment for the first time, sometimes these arguments can be blasted out of proportion, maybe falsely attributed to the relationship rather than the stressors brought on by the preparation for deployment. Sometimes this argument can cause fears that the relationship is going to be over, which is going to be a tremendous amount of anxiety for both the soldier and the spouse or significant other, especially if contact is going to be limited throughout the deployment. That's going to be something that's weighing on both their minds if they don't take care of it before the soldier leaves. However, like I kind of mentioned earlier, these arguments are primarily caused by the stress of the pending separation, and couples should work to address that issue and not necessarily attribute it to a damaged relationship. As some psychologists have found that it's typically easier to be angry than to confront the pain and loss of saying goodbye. for however long the deployment's going to be.
And this is important because any family issues left unresolved before the deployment can be pretty devastating. Just having soldiers that their minds are back home when you're deployed, their mind's not in the fight, and that can lead to injuries and getting people hurt. Even before the deployment, there's training accidents, and especially with the heavy equipment that the military has to work with, a lot of accidents can happen then. Being tired in the field, being tired during training can have lethal results. So bringing that to a deployment is tenfold worse. And even back home, being unsure of the situation going on and having any doubts for the family's worried about the soldier as well. And that tension just can kind of build, and it can spiral out of control. The home life can go downhill in a hurry. Children begin to act out more often when parents are deployed, and as the deployments are longer or more frequent, children tend to act out worse every time. So that's why they really have to have these issues resolved once the soldier gets home, before the soldier leaves.
Yeah, and I know a lot of the things we've stated are definitely easier said than done, but it's definitely helpful for military couples, especially in this pre-deployment stage, to discuss in detail a lot of the expectations of what's going to happen during the deployment, because a lot of the stress comes from an uncertainty of what's going to happen during the deployment, and just any degree of uncertainty of what's going to happen in the next couple of months. And one of the good things about having a discussion is you can help to clear up those uncertainties, because a lot of times there's things that the soldier might know but might not know is relevant for his spouse or significant other, or her spouse or significant other, as well as maybe the spouse is thinking of some things that the soldier hasn't thought of yet. So having conversations is a really good way to kind of pick through those and prepare for the changes to come that we mentioned in our first podcast, such as like the freedom to make independent decisions, contact with opposite sex, a lot of the things that we covered in the difficult conversations topic as well.
And that pretty much wraps up the pre-deployment stage.